UFC Vegas 91 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the lightweight division as Machete is a minus 198 favorite. The comeback on Gabriel Benitez is plus 164. And this was actually my first bet of the card. And it's not going to feel great, but I'm actually backing the underdog, the veteran here in Mugli Benitez. I backed him at plus 180 for a unit. I just think he's going to have multiple advantages in this spot despite the durability concerns, because that is a clear red flag with Benitez. He's been hurt multiple times. He's lost 3 of his last 4 fights. His only win in that span came against Charlie Ontiveros, who we know is no good and doesn't belong in the UFC and has since been cut. But I still think that Benitez is going to be throwing more volume on the feet. He's a better technical striker. We know he's going to stay active with the leg kicks, which is something that gave Machete issues against Slavaclaus in his last fight where he got brutally knocked out. But prior to that knockout, and he got dropped twice before getting knocked out in that fight, but prior to that, he was getting his legs beat up by just about everything that Slavaclaus landed with the leg kicks. And we know Benitez, even at this stage in his career, still one of the better leg kickers in the game. Benitez also has sneaky submission grappling upside, got a tight guillotine choke. I still have concerns with Machete's defensive grappling. We just really haven't seen it tested all that much. And he's just a guy who, yes, he carries power. He's young. I expect him to be making improvements, but he's generally just a low volume guy and doesn't really have any skills that blow you off the page. So like, unless he's able to hurt Benitez at a really high clip here, I just don't see him winning rounds. And I think Benitez is better in the clinch. I already mentioned the leg kicks. I think he's the better submission grappler as well. He just needs to avoid getting hurt by the power of Machete. I know it seems bad. He looked bad against Jim Miller here, his last fight, but even at this stage in his career, a declining Benitez, I think, could still have some potential to look like a live dog in this spot. So I'm backing the underdog in Benitez at plus 180, and he's going to be the pick. I think Benitez gets it done this weekend. Next fight up in the women's flyweight division, we have Ivana Petrovic, a minus 500 favorite. The comeback on Na Liang is plus 380, and this is one that's very clear to me in terms of DraftKings. You want to get exposure to Na Liang. Despite her being 0-3 in the UFC, she's been finished in all 3 of those fights. But I've compared her to like a Daniel De Silva type of fighter, a Daniel Lacerda fighter, where even though they're losing, they're having pockets of success, those early bursts in a lot of those fights. And we saw it in her UFC debut against Ariana Carnelossi, where she dropped her instantly. She's also a very aggressive grappler. She's going to look to land takedowns. We saw that against JJ Aldrich. She landed 3 takedowns before being finished in the second round. But just like a Daniel Lacerda, a Derek Minner, those type of fighters, they have significant round 1 upside. But if that doesn't happen, they just can't fight for 15 minutes. They fall off a cliff in terms of the cardio, and that's why you see her getting finished in just about all of her losses, and all of them at the UFC level, is because she just doesn't have the cardio to push that pace for 15 minutes. So this is one where I think she has clear round 1 upside, but she also has clear I'm going to get finished type of downside, even against Ivana Petrovic, who we know just isn't really as good as she was hyped up to be in her UFC debut. I actually bet Luana Carolina in that spot. I think it was plus 185, and Carolina got the better of her. You know, she forced her to work hard for the takedowns. When she got the takedowns, she wasn't really doing a lot, and Petrovic is a very low volume striker on the feet. So even though I think Liang has more round 1 upside, has clear grappling upside as well, I think the cardio is going to favor Petrovic, even though she's not a high-paced type of fighter. I just think the drop-off is very significant. So if Liang doesn't find that round 1 finish, I think Petrovic probably takes over in terms of the grappling, and she does have some pretty solid ground and pound. I think more times than not, she ends up getting the finish, but for DraftKings, I think it's one that you clearly want exposure to both sides, and personally, I'm going to be heavier on the underdog here, but the official pick is going to be Petrovic by submission. And next fight up in the lightweight division, we have James Lontop, a minus 350 favorite. The comeback on Chris Padilla is plus 285. Now, this fight was put together on short notice because Lontop was originally scheduled to face Gabe Green, who pulled out of this fight. So now they signed this this guy who I've never heard of prior to this announcement, Chris Padilla from the regional scene. He's a 13-6 fighter. He was scheduled to fight in Uriah Faber's regional promotion prior to this, prior to getting that UFC call. Now he's going to face James Lontop, who came off the Contender Series last season. And Lontop is not somebody that I think is this great prospect by any stretch. Now, he is still young. You can expect improvements. He's currently on a 12-fight win streak, including that Contender Series fight. But even coming into that fight against Malik Lewis, I didn't really, Lontop didn't really blow me away in terms of the tape. Like, I think he's a solid fighter wherever the fight goes, but he's not really overwhelming guys in any area. He does have legitimate knockout power. He seems to be pretty tough. He's never been knocked out. But if you watch multiple of his fights, he is getting hurt and he is getting rocked in some of those fights. That Contender Series fight got a little bit sweaty at times. The fight prior to Contender Series, he actually got dropped in that fight as well. So this guy is not like this super prospect by any stretch, but I don't think it's going to matter in this matchup because Chris Padilla, I just don't think is UFC level. I think the only reason he's getting the call here is to keep Lontop on the card for whatever reason, but Padilla doesn't belong here in my opinion. Anytime he's faced a step up in competition in terms of guys that you would actually recognize, he loses. Like outside of the Justin James fight, which ironically is his last fight, and James was also knocked out previously by my guy Gabriel Benitez, who we talked about in the first fight on this card, but we know Justin James is chinny, and Padilla was able to hurt him in round one, ended up getting the finish there. But any other time where he's facing someone that you've actually heard of, he's losing. And I think he's also somebody that struggles in terms of the defensive grappling. And I know Lontop isn't like an aggressive type of grappler, but he is going to be the better submission grappler here, the better wrestler as well. I'd expect him to have success in the clinch as well. So it's one where I'm not in love with Lontop, but I think this is his fight to lose. We're going Lontop by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup. And the theme of this card is low level and a lot of former Contender Series fighters making their follow-up, their sequel performance to their UFC debut. And a lot of these fighters lost their UFC debut. So certainly some questions to be answered with a lot of these young prospects, and one of them being Ketlin Souza. She's not a former Contender Series fighter, but she did face Karine Silva, who is a Contender Series fighter previously, who is also fighting on the main card of this Saturday. But Souza ended up going to the ground against Silva, which we know is probably a mistake at this point. Silva's very dangerous down there, and it was one of the nastier submissions last year where she basically just took Souza's knee and just popped it sideways. It looked disgusting. A lot of people were, freaking out about it on Twitter, thought maybe it was like a career ender. I actually don't know what the official diagnosis was on that. I didn't see any type of surgery on her Instagram. I'm sure there was some sort of rehab there, obviously, with how nasty that knee injury was. But she's back in the octagon this weekend. She's a big favorite here. And I think she's the rightful favorite because Mara McMahon is somebody that I was very harsh on in her UFC debut. I did not think she should have got the call, and it was another short notice one where they just needed somebody to keep the fight alive, and so they brought in Mara McMahon. She lost about every minute of that fight, but ended up making it the full 15 minutes against Josephine Knudsen, and that's really Mann's biggest asset to me is she's just really tough. She's tough to get out of there. I know she was knocked out on Contender Series against Bruna Brazil a couple years ago, but I think for the most part, Mann's durable, and she's just going to be somebody that hangs around, even if they're not winning minutes. And so I think the bigger question here is whether or not you think Souza can pay off her price on DraftKings. I'm leaning towards a fade just because I think Mann is tough enough to hang around for 15 minutes, but I do think Souza's the better fighter pretty much wherever the fight goes. I think she gets her hand raised. We're going Souza by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Kai Machado, a minus 125 favorite. The comeback on Dontel Mays is plus 105. And man, I don't know what to do with this fight. I'll be completely honest. I know there's people on both sides. Machado ended up getting steamed from the open, and now there seems to be a little bit buyback on Mays now that he's plus money. And I just think this is one that I'm going to stay away from in terms of a betting standpoint because I've never been right about Dontel Mays. Anytime I want to trust him, anytime he seems like he's just a layup, like that Hamdi fight, like it's just brutal trying to trust Dontel Mays to do anything right. And I think that's the biggest concern with him is it's not the skill set. He does have power. He's super long. He's shown that he can wrestle when he wants to. That Josh Parisian fight was basically the only fight where he did it. But I think trusting him to fight with the right game plan, to really have the fight IQ once he's inside the octagon, I just personally can't do it. I'm done trusting the guy. And on the flip side, Kai Machado is not somebody that I want to trust either. You know, he fought on Contender Series. He fought Kevin Slafarsky, who threw like 5 punches the entire fight. And Machado didn't really get tested on the regional scene. He was the BFL champ, the Canadian regional promotion, very low level of competition. And he looked okay in his last fight against Mick Parkin, but we know that he can be taken down. He doesn't work back to his feet very well. I don't really trust his cardio either, even though I do expect him to push a better pace than Dontel Mays. So this is one where it's like, Mays could look like a clear favorite to me if he comes in and tries to wrestle, uses his power, but I just don't trust him whatsoever. But I do trust that Machado's actually going to fight like he wants to win more. And I think he can throw more volume over 15 minutes if the fight gets extended. So I'm going to take Machado here, Machado by decision as the official pick. But again, I'm never right about Dontel Mays. So now that I'm picking against him, I'm sure he's going to wrestle and look like a big favorite. In terms of DraftKings, I'm going to have exposure to both sides because they're priced affordably in the mid-range. But the official pick is going to be Machado by decision. Next fight up, we have Michael Figlak, a minus 155 favorite. The comeback on Austin Hubbard is plus 130. And this is another one where I like the dog here. And I think this could be a potentially heavy dog card where you can make a case for a lot of them, and I think multiple underdogs come barking on Saturday, and I think Austin Hubbard makes a good case to be one of them because for starters, I think we're getting a buy low spot because of how poor he looked against Kurt Hollabaugh, and I had an over in that fight, so that was absolutely brutal to see him get finished in the second round, a guy that's usually pretty tough and pretty durable, hard to take down, hard to grapple, and he just ends up getting submitted in the second round. Now, I think Michael Figlak here, I have some serious concerns with him coming in as minus 155. For starters, coming into his UFC debut against Fares Ziam, you know, he was like this wrestling guy over in Cage Warriors and, you know, having success on the feet and all that. He was getting hurt on the feet against Ziam. He couldn't wrestle against Ziam. He just looked like he was outclassed in multiple areas in that fight. And I just have a hard time seeing him cover this price tag against Austin Hubbard, who historically his takedown defense is not that great. It's like 63%. But you look at the grapplers and the wrestlers that he's been facing, that's why it's so low, especially early on in the UFC where his takedown defense really wasn't that great. But he has made improvements along those fights, and he's been matched up against really good grapplers much of that time. So I think it doesn't really tell the whole story. I think he is going to be tough to take down if Figlak tries to go that route, a guy who I don't really respect his wrestling to begin with. And I actually think Hubbard could have some wrestling success of his own. We've seen Figlak not look too good being taken down, fighting off his back, trying to throw up subs, and that's not going to work against Austin Hubbard, who trains at elevation. We know he has good cardio, and he's relied on his wrestling over his last couple fights. Even that Hollabaugh fight, he landed takedowns in that fight. Prior to that, landed 4 takedowns in a fight. Like, this guy is getting better. I know he looked bad in his last fight, but he is the better wrestler in my opinion, and I think he's got better cardio, and I think the leg kicks could be a real issue because that's one of Hubbard's biggest strengths, and we know Figlak didn't fare too well against the leg kicks of Ziam. I think this is one where Hubbard has multiple advantages. It's going to be a close fight. I expect it to go 15 minutes. I'm going to side with the dog here. We're going Hubbard by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Victor Henry, a minus 470 favorite with Ronnie Yaya on the comeback at plus 360. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one because it's very clear that Yaya at this stage in his career, 40 years old, he's got one path to victory, and that's an early submission. And he's very dangerous if you're going to tangle with him on the mat, but he doesn't have good wrestling and he doesn't have good cardio. So if you can avoid grappling with this guy early, then I think you're going to win this fight 9 times out of 10 for the most part if you're a pretty solid fighter. And I do think Victor Henry is a pretty solid fighter. And I just expect him to keep distance, play it safe early, before Yaya has a chance to try to grapple him. And then Henry's going to pour on the volume. He's going to have a massive striking advantage here. He's got solid cardio. He can push a pace for 15 minutes. I think that's going to play out over time to where Henry ends up getting the finish in rounds 2 or round 3. We're going Henry by TKO. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Uros Medic, a minus 310 favorite. The comeback on Tim Dirty Bird Means is plus 250. And I think this is another one you want to target on DraftKings because Medic, we know historically, does not fight to decision. He's actually never been the distance once in his entire career. And we know what he's going to bring to the table. He fights out of the southpaw stance. He's a very powerful striker. He'll try some spinning back elbows, some powerful leg kicks as well. But if he doesn't hurt you early, he tends to fade. And we know his defensive grappling still needs work. He's been submitted in both of his professional losses, including his last fight against Mikdebek Oralbai, where he got submitted in the second round. And I just think this is one where, yes, he can hurt Means early. He certainly has the power to do that. And we know Means' durability is just not the same. He recently turned 40 himself, and he's been hurt over the course of his career, but especially lately, we've seen him getting hurt across multiple fights. But I also think Means is also a pretty good boxer, pretty good cardio historically, pretty good grappler as well. Like, there is a case to be made, again, where, yes, I expect Medic to be the favorite, to look like the favorite, have the potential to finish early, but if Means could stay alive and not get hurt, he is going to be a live dog here. So for that reason, I am going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings, but the official pick is going to be Medic by TKO. Which brings us to our next fight as Jonathan Pierce comes in as a minus 180 favorite. The comeback on David Onama is plus 150. And we'll start on the Pierce side. We know what he's going to bring to the table. The game plan with Pierce is to push a heavy grappling pace. He averages over 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he has great cardio as well. We know he can keep up that grappling pace for 15 minutes if he needs to. The concern with Pierce has always been that he's extremely hittable on the feet, and he's been rocked many, many times. Even in fights where he's winning, it's like you do not want to see this guy fight at space because he's getting stung, he's getting hurt, and now he's facing somebody in David Onama who we know has that freakish type of athleticism and power where he can certainly hurt him if you're going to try to strike with him. Now, the reason I'm still siding with Jonathan Pierce is because he's going to have that massive grappling advantage. We know Onama struggles to defend takedowns. He defends takedowns at under 50% in the UFC. So I think Pierce needs to wrestle early and often, and I expect him to do that. I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings because of the clear knockout upside for Onama, but more times than not, I think Pierce just grinds on him and stays glued to him enough to get his hand raised here. We're going Pierce by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup in the heavyweight division as Renato Denise is a minus 245 favorite currently. The comeback on Austin Lane is plus 200. Now, Austin Lane's coming off a first round knockout to Justin Tafa in his last fight. And I think that's the concern here because Lane has clear durability issues. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career. I think all of them were inside the first round, or at least 3 of them were inside the first round. So we know he has the propensity to get hurt early, and he's facing somebody that has clear round 1 knockout power. This guy, Denise, 6-0, all 6 of his wins, first round knockout. He's a former Glory kickboxer. We know he has some okay striking for the division, but the power is for real. Now, we still don't know what his cardio is going to look like. I'd suspect it to look bad if the fight gets extended. We don't really know what his grappling chops looks like either. Again, I'd expect that to be pretty bad. But I just don't think it matters in this type of matchup where these guys are going to swing. I expect Lane to get clipped early. Denise probably high rolls another finish here, and then maybe we're able to fade him in the future against a better prospect. We're going Denise by round 1 knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight in the women's flyweight division, a fun matchup between Karine Silva, who's now a minus 155 favorite, and the comeback on Ariana Lipski is plus 130. And this is one where I think it's very clear in terms of the dynamic what to expect here because Karine Silva, we know, is a very dangerous finisher in the first round. One of the better finishers in the division, in my opinion. She's 3-0 in the UFC. All 3 wins have come by first round submission. And we know that's kind of her MO, is she has a big right hand. She's powerful on the feet. and she's very aggressive with the grappling. She's got a couple good chokes as well. We saw that in her last fight against Marina Moroz, who she submitted with 1 second left in the round. We also saw it against Ketlin Souza, the fight I referenced earlier, where she just completely just popped her knee out effortlessly. So the finishing prowess is certainly there. Silva is very dangerous early. I have concerns with Silva because the few times where we have seen her get extended, and most recently in that Contender Series fight, in round 2, she looked like a standing corpse, in my opinion. Like, if that happens here against Lipski, I think Lipski has clear upside to take over if the fight gets extended. Now, why I'm still picking Silva is because the worry with Lipski is she's hittable. She's been knocked out 4 times in her career, so we know the chin isn't super great. And I could just see Silva hurting her early, high-rolling another finish here. I think that's the more likely outcome, but I am going to be interested in the live markets using our tools at fightnumbers.com, the odds screen that we have, which updates in real time for live betting. If we see Karine Silva really look like a favorite early, like I expect, but Lipski somehow survives to the bell, then certainly I'm going to be refreshing that odds screen, trying to get the best live price on Ariana Lipski, because I think if she does make it to round 2, she starts to look like a favorite. My concern is she just doesn't actually make it to round 2. So for DraftKings, I think Silva clearly has more upside, so she's my preferred play on DraftKings. We're going Silva by submission. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have the co-main event. Ryan Spann, a minus 205 favorite. The comeback on Bogdan Guskov is plus 170. And you guys know me, man. I'm not a Ryan Spann guy. I think I picked against this guy in almost every single one of his UFC fights, and he's burned me many times because he's the type of fighter who has clear finishing upside, like a Karine Silva that I just mentioned, that early submission upside, and he has power on the feet. The problem with Spann is that I don't think his cardio is very good, and he's got clear durability issues. He's only been knocked out 3 times in his career, but we know he's been hurt many, many times, because even in those fights where he's winning, he's usually getting rocked at some point in those fights. So this is one where, even though I don't think Guskov is very good, many people have labeled him as a fraud, and he might be, but he does have clear power, and he is going to go out there and swing heavies, and I just expect these guys to just, trade blows early on in this fight. And if that's the case, I think I trust Guskov's durability more. So in a fight that I expect to be more of a coin flip, I don't mind leaning into the variance and just going heavier on the underdog here in Guskov. We're going to go with Guskov by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have our main event. It's Matheus Nicolau, minus 192. The comeback on Alex Perez is plus 160. Perez stepping in on short notice here to replace Manel Kopp, who was originally scheduled for the rematch against Matheus Nicolau and had to pull out of the fight again due to injury. So Perez is here on short notice, but I actually think this is a decent spot for Alex Perez because clearly the market doesn't trust him, and I get why. The dude misses weight, he pulls out of fights, blah, blah, blah. That fight against Muhammad Makayev, his last time out, I actually thought we saw some pretty good things from Perez. Not only did he make weight, not only did he not pull out, but he actually looked good to me at times in that fight. The problem with Perez is that, the fight was there for the taking, certainly. It was a very close fight, but he just spent so much time defensively. Like, he was just fending off takedowns. You can't score points if you're only defending takedowns and doing no sort of damage. That looks great, sure, and maybe the optics were in his favor at times, but if you're not actually landing damage or doing basically anything, you can't win the fight. Even though you're preventing your opponent from scoring points and not doing much offensively, you're still not scoring yourself. And I think that was the biggest thing for Perez, is like, he just had to be a little bit more assertive there. I think he certainly could have won that fight. And if he did win that fight, the odds would look a lot different here, despite him being here on short notice. I think Matheus Nicolau is a solid fighter. He's very well-rounded, technical on the feet, not the biggest high-volume guy. He's a black belt in BJJ, mixes in a takedown, averages over 1 takedown per 15 minutes, not a super aggressive grappler either. And I just don't think he's the style of fighter to cover these pretty big price tags here, because he's not aggressive, doesn't push a big pace, doesn't take a lot of risk, and he's chinny as well. He's been knocked out multiple times, including his last fight against Brandon Royval. And he's facing somebody in Perez who's a good wrestler, who pushes a pace on the feet, who's got good leg kicks, and he's a pretty solid boxer as well. The main concern with Perez here is he just always sticks his neck out there begging to be submitted. He's been submitted a bunch of times in his career. But again, I don't think Nicola is this like aggressive submission grappler. So I think Perez has some significant upside here. I'm going to side with Perez. He's going to round out a card that I think could be full of dogs, and I think he's one of them. We're going to go Perez by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. We have the picks by Evan, Aze, and Pepe. We have the odds screen as well. A couple other tools. Definitely check it out, fightnumbers.com. Now through Saturday, you can use promo code GIGA, G-I-G-A, for 25% off now through Saturday. Be sure to check it out. Let me know what you guys think. Best of luck, and we'll see you next time.